Over the next 2 days here on Fantasy Football Today, we're going to be talking about 13 wide receivers 30 through 42 in the PPR consensus rankings. Now, these guys won't necessarily be drafted in rounds 7 through 9 because some of them are going a lot higher, some of them may be lower, but typically this range of receiver 30 through 42 is about rounds 7 through 9. It's just that this is rankings, not ADP. Anyway, some of the guys we're going to be talking about, Chris Godwin, we're a lot higher on him than ADP. Zay Flowers, we're a lot lower than him on ADP. Terry McLaurin, Malik Nabers, Jayden Reed, and Marquise Brown. Those are the 6 that we're going to get to today. Godwin, Flowers, McLaurin, Nabers, Reed, and Brown. And we'll also get to Dave Richard, Jamie Eisenberg, and hopefully Heath Cummings. Hello, Dave Richard.
Adam, I wanted to give you the names of some players who are not wide receivers that are going in between round 7 and 9 to think about as we talk about the wide receivers. And if you don't like the names I'm about to give you, then you should probably draft players at those positions sooner than round 7, or maybe in the case of quarterback after. Running backs that are going in round 7 through 9, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, Zach Moss, James Conner. I don't think that'll stay that way, but that's where he's at right now. Ramondre is around 7 through 9 running back. Nick Chubb is around 7 through 9 running back. Eckler, Brian Robinson, Javonte Williams. I'll just stop there. So if some of those names made you queasy, you should probably look for a running back earlier. Quarterbacks, Jordan Love on down. If you look at anybody's rankings, you'll see the guys who are on down. Tight ends, Kittle is in this range. Evan Ingram is in this range, and this is full PPR. And Bowers is in this range. So a lot of wide receivers are going to go here, and some of them should outperform their ADP. It's up to us to figure out which ones are the best ones to take that risk on.
Yeah, that list of running backs didn't actually sound so bad, but the list of wide receivers doesn't sound so bad either. But I think I don't really know yet which AD are using CBS PPR
That's
ADP.
our ADP, off-season ADP.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like Fantasy Pros and I think even some other like maybe Draft Sharks, seems like pretty heavy on wide receiver early. So this range might have a better, you might be looking at wide receiver 32 versus RB 25 or something like that. We could probably easily look that up, but you might be deeper into the wide receiver pool than the running back pool at that point in the draft. Sure. Yeah. Hi, Jamie.
Hey.
And he should be here as well. He's working on a camera issue. I'm going to just read some quick news and notes, and then we'll have some stats to give. Joe Burrow is learning the piano, and that is helping his wrist rehab. So rock on, Joe Burrow. Brandon Ayuk seems to really like Washington and Pittsburgh. If he's not on the Niners, it seems like he'd like to be on Washington, reunite with Daniels.
It might break the internet if he goes to Pittsburgh.
How so?
Because everybody thinks he looks like Mike Tomlin.
Stop getting your action. I think he'd be happy to go to any team that pays him.
Yeah, but he keeps talking about those teams.
Well, Washington is obvious because he's played with Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, right,
so,
they're buds.
And they're friends. So that would be interesting.
And Pittsburgh is interested in him and might consider paying him. And that's why he's like, yeah, Pittsburgh, let's go.
Yeah.
If there was a team in Alaska that was going to make him a top 5 highest paid wide receiver, he'd be like, all right, Alaska, baby, igloo me.
Igloo me. Yeah, so Tyler Higbee could start the season on the PUP list for the Rams. Does that open up any sleeper tight ends?
Yes.
Yeah.
Colby Parkinson was a weird ad that the Rams made this offseason.
It's interesting between him and Davis Allen, who's going to be the guy that.
Yeah, I think Allen got the opportunity just because they didn't have anybody else. They seem to really like Parkinson's skill set. And the week 1 matchup should be a high-scoring game against Detroit. That's who they play. At Detroit, then at Arizona. I mean, there's going to be better tight end streamers, but like Parkinson's on my queue in Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah.
At the tight end premium league. He's somebody that I will look for.
I think any tight end with a pulse is on everybody's queue in Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah, but but when we were doing the draft, I talked about this on a previous show. When we were doing the draft on Sunday night, I just, once I get past like maybe Pat Freiermuth, I feel like I don't want any. I don't know. It doesn't feel great.
We know what to look for from tight ends with targets. If if it's somebody who's got a glimmer of hope of being a second on the team in targets, might get some red zone touchdowns, you go after him a little bit.
The 4 guys that I look for late, past Fryermuth, because I mean, he's borderline top 12 guy, are Tyler Conklin, Ben Sinnott, Juwan Johnson, and Hunter Henry.
Henry's a great one. I'm not touching Juwan Johnson because who knows when he'll be back from his foot injury.
Oh, he's supposed to be back by camp.
I think along the Senate range too, like Zach Ertz might be a week 1 streamer.
Yes.
As long as Zach Ertz stays healthy, he's probably going to see more targets than we would like.
Sure. Noah Fant is another one.
Yep.
Do we even, I can't even say it. Never mind.
Hayden
I don't
Hurst.
even want to say his name. I don't want to put that name in people's mind.
All right, guys. So let me just say this. One more note. Chris Godwin's going to play more in the slot, according to Greg Allman of Fox Sports. We've heard this a while during the offseason, and that's a good thing. He played in the slot 33% of his snaps last year, which was about half of what he did the year before. We want more Chris Godwin in the slot. We're going to get more Chris Godwin in the slot. And yes, actually just looking at CBS ADP right now, CBS PPR ADP, which I think is pretty damn good ADP if you ask me. When you get to the 70s, when you get to pick 72-ish, we are talking 32 wide receivers off the board, 22 running backs off the board. So in this range of wide receiver, you might actually like the running backs better at this point in the draft because wide receivers are going earlier in full PPR. Podcast awards. Where else are you going to hear analysis like that, right? We rule. Go to podcastawards.com and vote for fantasy football today. Nominate fantasy football today for the sports category. And if you want the People's Choice category as well, it takes 2 seconds. No, I don't want to. 2 seconds is an exaggeration. It takes about 40 seconds, I would say. I think you can make this happen to go to podcastawards.com and nominate fantasy football today. We will be your best friend if you nominate us and then get us to the next round. And hopefully we'll win this year. We've been so close. This is the year we want to win the sports category or the People's Choice Award on podcastawards.com. Please sign up now and vote. We did some Calvin. Okay, this seriously just a couple minutes on this because we spent so much time talking about Ridley yesterday, but we didn't have Heath on, and he is obviously the high guy on Ridley. We didn't love him in terms of where he was in the consensus.
Man, I'm getting like hate tweets from people. I'm like, I wasn't even on the show.
I know.
Telling me, well, I'm going to regret being so low on Calvin Ridley. I'll tell you, I might regret something about Calvin Ridley this year. It won't be being too low on him. It's possible I'll regret being too high on him. But I think I'm the only reason he was on that show on Friday because I've got him ranked as a top 20 wide receiver. And the tweets kind of made the points that I probably would. Like, I think this is going to be a pretty high volume pass offense in Tennessee. We've already heard talk that he will be playing the Jamar Chase role in this offense. I expect him to be the most targeted wide receiver. And there were plenty of reasons that you could think his production is going to be better than it was last year. One would be maybe he will just be standing inbounds instead of out of bounds on the 5 end zone targets that he messed up last year. He also, I believe, led the NFL in pass interferences drawn or was towards the very top.
That was the stat I was going to give. That was
often a very good indicator of lost fantasy points to things that are beyond your control. And I think there's a decent chance that the Tennessee Titans throw for more passing yards and touchdowns than Jacksonville did last year.
All right. It was 136 yards in pass interference, penalty yards that he drew, which led the NFL. And I want to give at MM_13_ credit for that one, for yelling at me for being too low on Calvin Ridley, which I don't necessarily agree with, but he did. The pass interference thing was interesting because I think Chris, I wasn't able to back this up. I don't really know where to get reliable pass interference stats. I mean, I found a couple websites, but I don't know if they're totally legit, but the Ridley thing is legit. But 2 years ago, Chris kept saying that Mike Evans, he was having this bad year, and he was drawing a lot of pass interference penalties, and then he was one of the best picks in fantasy in 2023. Stat of the day number 2, I want to look at a few wide receivers here, and then we'll get to the meat of the show, I promise, who did really well or really poorly on deep balls, and 2 guys who were just awful on deep balls last year, Stephon Diggs and Chris Olave. Air yards, 30 or more air yards. Stephon Diggs had 2 catches for 84 yards and no touchdowns on 12 targets of 30 or more air yards. Chris Olave was even worse. 2 catches for 75 yards and no touchdowns on 16 targets of 30 or more air yards. And Diggs, I don't know if anyone cares about this, but Dave, I sent you the videos. I thought Josh Allen was awful on those throws.
He was.
Diggs could have had an extra 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, that might be off a little bit, but I'm serious. Like, he had a lot of meat on the bone. He was getting so open, and Josh Allen was terrible on these deep throws. I don't know if that matters, but it certainly did not help Stephon Diggs' stats last year.
The takeaway for me, there were 2. You said one of them. The other one is that Stephon Diggs was still getting open. He has some great double moves, these post corner routes, corner post routes, both of them working in his favor, that he's buying 2-3 yards of separation from a defensive back. And in a couple of the cases, he just ran past guys. So he still has speed, still has agility. And now we're adding him into Houston. CJ Stroud, a basic stat, okay? Completion rate of throws of 30-plus air yards. One of the top 3 quarterbacks was Derek Carr, 48.1%. CJ Stroud was 11th with 33%. Josh Allen, 18th, 26.7% completion rate on throws of 30-plus air yards. Allen was off on a lot of those throws. I don't know if this is a new thing for Allen. I don't know if this is something that he's always done, but we do know that deep accuracy was an issue for him earlier in his career. It wasn't a pass rush thing. There weren't plays where he was about to get smashed and he just had to get rid of the ball. I wonder if this is something that Houston will try and bake into Stephon Diggs' role in 2024. And if it is, then Diggs is going to have a pretty decent year because Stroud proved that he could hit those deep throws.
Yeah. One of the weirdest things, Olave, like I said, air yards, 30 or more air yards.
That's
Olave,
weird.
2 catches for 75 yards on 16 targets. Rashid Shaheed, 9 catches, 408 yards, 4 touchdowns on 15 targets. I haven't really looked, but I think there's a chance that Shaheed was the best in the NFL on deep throws, if we say 30 or more air yards is a deep throw,
Right.
and Olave was the worst.
MVS exists.
I'm going to look it up right now.
I actually think I could tell you. Valdez Scantling, was he on here? I don't even see him on here. I don't know. How many targets did he have last year?
Too many.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Let's go to a commercial break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Godwin, Flowers, McLaurin, Nabers, Reed, Marquise Brown. We'll be back right after this on Fantasy Football Today.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
Okay, Heath, you had me interested. Marquez Valdez-Scantling only had 42 targets, so he didn't qualify, but he had 1 catch for 34 yards on 10 targets of 30 or more air yards. That's really bad.
I don't believe that's because Patrick Mahomes was terrible on those throws last year.
Probably not. Marquise Brown is also terrible. 1 catch for 36 yards on 10 targets. We're about to talk about him. All right, let's focus on the show here. So if we look at just these 6 guys, Godwin, Flowers, McLaurin, Nabers, Jayden Reed, Marquise Brown, who has the most upside in this group?
Nabers.
Malik Nabers.
Nabers.
Who has the highest floor in this group?
Godwin.
Godwin.
I think it probably. I'm going to say Terry McLaurin just so we don't give the same answer for all 3, but it's him.
Hold on. I think that could be PPR versus non-PPR. I wouldn't say Godwin if it's non-PPR.
Okay.
McLaurin or Reed would probably be my answer if it's a non-PPR. I'll say Reed.
Interesting. Most downside, again, I'm just so people, if you're having trouble following, Godwin, Flowers, McLaurin, Nabers, Jayden Reed, Marquise Brown. Most downside.
Nabers.
Reed.
Player you draft a lot.
Godwin.
I maybe McLaurin.
I wouldn't say I draft any of them a lot, but Godwin the most probably.
Player you draft, player you avoid.
Flowers. I haven't drafted him once.
McLaurin.
I haven't drafted Nabers once.
And
Is that
Flowers,
because he's just not falling to you, Heath?
We're going to talk a lot about Malik Nabers, but yeah, it's part of it. Like I think his ADP is like 24th overall, or 24th at wide receiver, not 24th overall, obviously.
Yeah, and Flowers is 23. So, is there anyone in this group, Godwin, Flowers, McLaurin, Nabers, Reed, Brown, that any of you are? Do we have like a Calvin Ridley where one of you is super high on one of these guys or super low on one of these guys?
I'm super low on Nabers compared to everyone else, I believe. I think every other player within like 30 to 42, I was within 4 or 5 spots of consensus, except for Nabers.
Okay. So then we can really compare these guys to ADP. Where do you have Nabers, by the way, Heath?
42.
Okay. And he's 33 in the consensus ADP. Godwin's 30th and he's 38th in I'm sorry, consensus rankings. Godwin is 30th and he's 38th in ADP. Flowers is 31st in the rankings. He's 23rd in ADP. McLaurin is 32nd in the rankings. He's 35th in ADP. Nabers is 33rd in the rankings. He's 24th in ADP. Jayden Reed is 34th in the rankings, 31st in ADP, and Marquise Brown 35th in the rankings, 36th in ADP. So you'll notice there, Godwin were 8 spots higher than his ADP. Flowers were 8 spots lower than his ADP. Nabers consensus were 9 spots lower than his ADP. Heath is almost 20 spots lower than Nabers' ADP. So those are the 3 discrepancies, biggest ones. We'll start with Chris Godwin. Jamie, give me a one or two pros and cons for Chris Godwin.
The last 5 games of the season last year, he had more targets than Mike Evans, and he's moving back in the slot. That's the pro. The con is that he is allergic to the end zone and has struggled post Tom Brady.
Yeah, from 2018 through 2020, Chris Godwin had 23 total touchdowns in those 3 seasons. He had 21% of his team's touchdown catches. Last 3 years, he has 10 touchdowns in his last 3 years, and he has 10% of his team's touchdown catches. That's with 18 more red zone targets than he had the previous 3 years, and the same amount of green zone targets, but 9 fewer end zone targets. Is there anything we could do about this? One thing I have noticed is that his ADOT has been a lot lower, and there is a little bit of a correlation between ADOT and touchdowns, I think, but is he just a low touchdown guy, or do you think he can get back to the 7 to 9 range that he was, Chris Godwin, from 2018 to 2020?
It'd be a little tough to say that that's something you want to hang your hat on, that he's going to all of a sudden go back to becoming a more consistent or a higher volume touchdown type of player. But, certainly it's possible. Mike Evans loses a touchdown or 2 and they go in Godwin's direction. We'll see with maybe more for Trey Palmer, the addition of Jalen McLaughlin, McMillan. What am I doing?
Was there a trade we didn't know about?
Jalen McMillan, excuse me. And Cade Otton, guys that I think have an opportunity to play in this offense and be successful. So, those guys will take away a little bit from everybody. And obviously, what they'll do with not just Rachaad White, but addition of Bucky Irving. So there's a lot of mouths to feed here. And, you're asking Baker to continue to, I think ascend as opposed to level off or go backwards. And we've seen what happens, or has happened to one situation. But when Dave Canales has left the team, the passing game and the quarterback has regressed a little bit. So I hope that's not the case with Baker. But in any event, I think Godwin's priced appropriately. You're hoping that the move back to the slot is going to help him from a reception standpoint, target standpoint, all those things. Build off the way that he finished last year. Mike Evans a year older. If he loses a step and Baker starts to lean on Godwin more, I think he'll be in a great spot. Okay,
and remember, you actually think he's underpriced based on CBS ADP because he's 38th at wide receiver.
Yeah, so. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive drafting him if that's the ADP. But again, I don't think you should all of a sudden go back to, hey, Chris Godwin's in the slot. He's a top 24 receiver again. I'll say what I said yesterday. He's in that group for me of basically like wide receiver 18 through wide receiver 30, where I think they're all top 20 caliber options. And so he's at the tail end of it. I think he's like 28th for me, 29th. But somebody that I'm very excited to draft this year. Just I'm not going to go and reach for him sooner than he has to go.
Okay, Dave, Jamie, or Dave Heath, you want to add anything?
Jamie said almost everything that I would have said about Chris Godwin. I will say, and I've talked about this before, that group of 18 to 30 is really, really close. There's a pretty decent gap between those guys and my number 38 wide receiver. So I think I love the discount in terms of ADP. I love drafting him as a number 3 wide receiver. And we talk about this occasionally, like that contingent upside. If something happens to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin might be a top 12 wide receiver.
I think that that's absolutely in play. Just we don't want to count on that. I hate that contingency argument for like 95% of the people in the National Football League, because Evans doesn't miss time. Like, we know he's old and all that stuff, but I don't think we can like count on that. That's not a reason to take Chris Godwin. You're taking Chris Godwin because we still think the target volume is going to be there, and he's a safe play. And the ADOT will probably go down, but the number of games where he has 6 for 70 is going to be pretty high. And that's a safe floor. That's a really good number 3 receiver in full PPR. And so there are receivers that I've got ranked ahead of him that have more upside. Nabers should be one of them. He's not. But that's something that could change. Ridley is ahead of him. Christian Kirk is kind of the same guy, but we've seen him make explosive plays. We've seen him score a lot of touchdowns. I would take him ahead of Godwin. I would take Tank Dell ahead of Chris Godwin. And I think that 1 year without Tom Brady, plus he was hurt during the majority of the 2023 season, I think the new role plus a healthier Chris Godwin should equal good production, not great production. And that's why he's in this range for me. He's wide receiver 30.
And here's where Chris Godwin has finished per game. And obviously, he's kind of a guy that you could see being a lot better in PPR, especially lately. But here's where let's say half PPR per game. Last 5 seasons, Chris Godwin, number 2 per game. That was a tremendous season. Number 15, number 8 per game, number 20 per game, which was a weird season where he just got like 160 targets and didn't really do much with them, but he caught a lot of passes. And then number 39 last year. So he was top 20 4 straight years. He was top 15, 2019, 20, and 21. Then 20th and 39th per game in half PPR. All right, let's go to Zay Flowers, guys. Zay Flowers, rookie season, was number 36 per game in non-PPR, number 33 per game in full PPR, on pace for more. He didn't quite crack the 900 mark, but he was on pace for 912 yards. And big differences for him with and without Mark Andrews. With Mark Andrews on the field, 19% target per route run rate. Without him on the field, 22% target per route run rate. The target share went from 22.3% with Andrews on the field, 25.4% with Andrews off the field. And the production was just different. It was just better. All right, Heath, give me pros and cons for Zay Flowers.
The pros are he was, pretty good as a rookie wide receiver. And generally speaking, when you're pretty good as a rookie wide receiver, you get better in year 2 or year 3, and you become someone that's close to like that wide receiver 23 would make perfect sense to me if it wasn't for the fact that his good production was so much influenced by Mark Andrews. If the same exact group was coming back that played all the games last year, then him going from wide receiver 30 to wide receiver 23 in year 2 would make perfect sense. But the bad news, as you said it, 19% target per route run when Mark Andrews was on the field. We're not projecting a Mark Andrews. Yes, and I know Dave said he hates it. He has the contingent upside. If something happens to Mark Andrews, he's probably a number 2 wide receiver. If something doesn't, he's probably a low-end number 3. We've got him consensus at wide receiver 31. I've got him at wide receiver 32.
But why do you guys think Zay Flowers is going so far ahead? He's 23, I believe, in ADP.
Because he's a young wide receiver who was really pretty good in the second half of the season, and we generally expect those guys to get better as they grow in the league.
Yeah, so you're gonna have to convince people they're making a mistake here.
I think he's such a fascinating case study because we usually see rookie wide receivers when they break out. It's usually the second half of the season, unless they're just super elite. But that was the point where he started to play well, and it coincides with Andrews going down. It was week 11 when Andrews got hurt, and so. Is it all tied to Andrews? I mean, it's hard to overlook that clearly because he's such a big part of the offense and they don't throw the ball a lot. But you all are also talking about that's the point in the season when you start to see that ascension. And so can he build off of it? Does he, supplant Andrews as the number 1 guy for Lamar Jackson? I mean, those are certainly relevant things that could happen. But, the thing that I go back to with this offense is there's no chance that defenses are playing them to throw the ball at this point. With Lamar Jackson and now Derrick Henry, it's stop the run first, which is most defenses playing anyway, but it's clearly the priority for the Ravens. Now you have the wrinkle of, okay, it's not the same Ravens offense. We saw that last year. They are going to throw the ball a little bit more with the coordinator change. So how much of that will benefit Flowers? How much of that will benefit Andrews? And it just makes them such a difficult puzzle to solve if you're trying to stop them. And so I think Flowers is probably being drafted too soon. I think we all agree on that. That 23 is a little bit too high, but it wouldn't surprise me even with Andrews there if he continues to build off of it, because Jackson's such a unique talent. He's so good at throwing the ball, despite the people that still nitpick that. And if Flowers can build off of that, and he's the guy that spends the offseason with him. Andrews is not. Flowers and Lamar Jackson are probably throwing today somewhere in South Florida. They just have
3 blocks from our office.
Yeah, they have a very good rapport.
It really is.
Flowers did that right away, when he came into the league last offseason. And so it wouldn't shock me if Flowers is the target leader on this offense. I don't think it's going to be the case, but it wouldn't shock me. But in any event, I think he's somebody that, again, similar to a couple of these other guys we talked about. I'll say the same thing I said about Ridley. I like Ridley. I just don't want to reach for Ridley. I like Godwin. I don't want to go crazy for Godwin. And I like Flowers. I just don't want to reach for him as a 23rd receiver off the board.
So I've got 2 cons that bug me about Flowers, because and it bugs me because, like everybody else is saying, supremely talented wide receiver. He's on my dynasty team. I think he's an awesome receiver. I just don't like the spot that he's in. He's actually led all Ravens receivers since Lamar Jackson's been under center for them in PPR points per game over a season. That number is 12.9. No other wide receiver in Baltimore has averaged better than that in a season with Lamar Jackson under center.
Is that a Lamar Jackson stat or a Greg Roman stat?
It could be both. Listen, last year there was no Greg Roman, and it was 12.9, and that's as good as it gets. The other set that I have on Flowers is that there were 7 games last year where he had at least 13 PPR points. So that's not bad. That's a safe floor. And we know he's got the ceiling to get into the 30s. And he will in some given weeks, which makes him awesome in best ball. More of a number 3 flexi type receiver in redraft. In those 7 games, a Ravens running back had 14 or fewer PPR points in 6 of 7. And they just improved their running game. How many games this year are the Ravens going to have with a running back with 14 or fewer PPR points? And that's independent of whether Mark Andrews is there or not. So stronger running game. Mark Andrews is back. What's left for Zay Flowers that warrants him going as a top 50 pick? I don't see it.
I think maybe there's a broader question about extremely mobile quarterbacks, the best ones, and how many players can be fantasy standouts in those offenses. I'm just thinking about this now. This is not a prepared segment or anything, but mobile quarterbacks are a lot of fun, but they're also, in some ways, they're pretty bad for everyone else. You don't agree with that?
Two
if
can
you're talking
for sure.
about creating 3 or 4 different starters in the offense, those are hard. That's hard to find from any offense. But anytime you've got one of these mobile quarterbacks that's going to go out of the pocket and they're reading downfield and they just don't like what they see, they're going to take off. And so that's a pass attempt. And in the case of Lamar Jackson, that happens 2-3 times a game. So yeah, of course that's going to hurt him. If you're looking for 3 Ravens that are must-start players outside of Lamar Jackson, I think it's going to be tough. Unless it's a deeper league, then Flowers would qualify. But in a regular league where it's 2 wide receivers and a flex, is Flowers a must-start there? Maybe as your flex.
I think Jalen Hurts is the best example, right? The Eagles.
But even then, last year, A.J. Brown was awesome. And then, obviously, Devontae in the games where Goddard was out, he was awesome.
You have to go to 2 years.
A.J. Brown was a little less awesome in those games, if I recall.
You have to go to 2 years ago where Smith and Brown finished as top 12 receivers overall, I think top 15 per game, but you didn't really get a great running back out of that.
No. And how did Goddard do? Probably not great either.
He was okay. He got hurt. He missed some time.
Right, which is why Smith did well.
Right. Yeah, probably right. If Smith hadn't gotten hurt, then he would not have really, he was right, not even a top 30 wide receiver. I'm sorry, if Goddard hadn't gotten hurt. If Goddard hadn't gotten hurt, I don't know if Smith would have finished that. Anyway, and I don't know, that's the thing. I don't really think Lamar Jackson can throw for, what did the Eagles throw for that year? Like 4,600 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
Well,
Jackson.
they can't. They won't allow him to.
Yeah, well.
If the defense isn't as good, I think he could. And I think it's going to be a really concentrated passing attack. It could be a situation where half the targets are going to Flowers and Andrews.
Yeah, unless you're a Bateman guy.
Again, Mark Andrews was like, Rashad Bateman's going to have a huge year. There's a lot of
everybody's saying that about Bateman, and like, Whatever.
All right, you want to talk about Terry McLaurin?
Sure.
We'll do it after this break. We'll be right back with Terry McLaurin and 3 others after this on Fantasy Football Today. Terry McLaurin, Dave, you can give me the pros and cons for Terry McLaurin, who has never finished inside the top 20 on a per-game basis in non or full PPR. Probably not half either, but how about that for McLaurin? Go.
So that's the first con on Terry McLaurin. He has one season where he's averaged more than 13.7 PPR points per game. He's never been above 9.6 non-PPR points per game. But he does average around 7 targets per game, but rarely does he get into that 8+ target range. That's a bit of a problem. The numbers that you gave are a problem. The fact that he's only scored like 4 or 5 touchdowns, in fact, it's either been one or the other, each of his last 4 seasons, that's a problem as well. The upside case for him, the pro case, we know he's a talented wide receiver. We know that he's fast. We know that he can get open, and he's got a quarterback upgrade. At least it seems that way with Jayden Daniels. I don't know if we're ready to say that Jayden Daniels is going to come in the league and be an awesome thrower. We know he's going to run, and that ties into what we just got done talking about with the Ravens and how many guys can a quarterback like that support, especially as a rookie. That makes you a little skittish. But Jayden Daniels was an accurate thrower in college. And when you're comparing him to the likes of who was it, like Heineke? No, Heineke wasn't even there last year. Who were the quarterbacks in Washington?
Sam Howell.
Oh,
yeah. It was terrible. All right. So I think that this is
terrible. That was a good howl.
It was a busy howl. He threw a lot, and it just wasn't very good.
I was talking about my howl, Dave. But
that's always good.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't know what kind of noise you're going to make for Jayden Daniels, but I think he's going to be a better thrower than anybody that McLaurin's had over at least the last 2 seasons, when 20.6% of his targets were uncatchable.
Okay, go ahead, Heath. You can go next on Terry McLaurin. How do you feel about him?
I have almost no feelings about Terry McLaurin. Like, I'm not saying that I've got so much to say about Malik Nabers and almost nothing to say about Terry McLaurin. I just don't really feel like there's that much upside, and I don't really feel like there's that much risk. He's probably going to average, 60, 65 yards per game, score 5 to 7 touchdowns, finish around wide receiver 30.
If he's scoring 5 to 7 touchdowns, I'm excited.
He scored 5 last year, didn't he?
Yeah, but it's been 4 or 5 each of the last 4
scored
seasons.
4 last year.
Like, if you're telling me there's hope of 7 touchdowns, which, I mean, there is. If it's a better quarterback, then yeah, there's a chance of that. But I'm not drafting him with, all right, 7 touchdowns on deck for Scary Terry. I agree with your sentiment, Heath, that he's just kind of one of those safe fallback wide receiver 3s that you'll be happy to settle for.
The Commanders averaged 245.5 passing yards per game last year. They think the most.
Throw it out.
Well, they threw them right. Right. That's the thing. It's like they actually haven't been that bad. They haven't been Garrett Wilson, George Pickens, Drake London bad. It's not like McLaurin's dealt with that. I'm not just talking about last year. I'm talking about in his career. He has not had good quarterback play, but he has not had among the worst in the NFL. Now, Jayden Daniels, I don't know. What do you think? You think he'll even get 220 passing yards per game next year?
No.
Probably not.
I'll say yes, but if you make it 240, I'll say no.
So the pie is shrinking.
No
the
question.
pie is shrinking. They added another receiver that they like in McCaffrey. They like the 2 tight ends that they have. I think there's upside with Sinnott more so than there was with Ertz, but he's going to be a guy that factors in. They just brought in one of the best pass catching running backs in the league, in Austin Eckler. I mean, yeah, the pie is definitely shrinking.
And they're not going to throw nearly as much. They've made it clear they don't want to do that. I think this is a team that wants to, if they had their druthers, they'd run a lot. They're going to lean on defense. They're going to try and grind out their wins. What'll probably end up happening is that they'll have to throw.
They're going to be way behind. They're not going to be able to do that.
I bet there's going to be some games where they're underdogs and they keep it very, very close and maybe even win in the 4th quarter with that formula.
Like, I didn't have anything to say about Terry McLaurin, but I think listening to everybody else talk about him, I'm probably going to move him down this afternoon a little bit.
Well, where do you have him now?
32, like right where we do. Feelingless.
Yeah, he really needs more targets. We don't really talk about that with McLaurin, but for a guy who plays pretty much every game, he doesn't. Dave said this. He's in like the 7 target range. Doesn't usually get up to 8. His target per route run rate is just very average, and he's just never been an elite target getter. So that's and more, maybe even more importantly, red zone targets. He just doesn't get a lot of those. So I guess we kind of feel like the yards are probably not going up. The targets, yards, catches, that stuff's probably not going up. For him to outperform his ADP and be a top 24 receiver, we probably need more touchdowns, which we always say are the toughest to predict.
It just feels like there's no breakout potential.
Yeah. Daniels would have to really love him and be probably exceed our expectations.
It's going to come down to explosive plays, which has been an area where McLaurin has been good at, and we know he can do better. I'm counting on the target. I've got him ranked exactly where Heath has him ranked, which is at 32. But I think Daniels is a good deep ball thrower who can get the ball to McLaurin. I think McLaurin will be his favorite target. I think he's an okay number 3 wide receiver. I don't mind giving him another shot.
All right, let's go to Jayden Reed. Jamie, back to you on Jayden Reed. Pros and cons.
I do like Heath talking while he's on mute. That's my favorite thing.
Sorry. Didn't notice.
Pros for Jayden Reed. There's some rushing upside there. We kept calling him Baby Deebo Samuel last year. He scored 2 rushing touchdowns. I think people think he scored like 5 or 6. No, he scored 2. So there is some potential there. Obviously, there's the, not to go against what Dave said about the injury risk, but obviously there's an injury risk on this team and Christian Watson. And so when Watson was out, Jayden Reed was even better than what he showed in his rookie campaign. But you have to factor that in, just given Christian Watson's injury track record. The cons are there's a lot of mouths to feed. You look at this receiving core, they're expecting more from Dontavian Wicks. I don't think Romeo Doubs is completely going away by any stretch. If Watson stays healthy, if the tight ends stay healthy, both guys have battled injuries. Musgrave last year, Kraft right now. And the run game might be better with the addition of Josh Jacobs. At least that's the expectation, certainly seeing what happened to Aaron Jones last year. So, he makes me a little nervous, just again, you look at that number as you're watching on YouTube, but the 10 total touchdowns, 8 receiving, 2 rushing, that number I think is hard to replicate. And so if you take the touchdowns away from him and, cut them in half, which is certainly a possibility, then he could be ranked way too high and being drafted way too soon. So I like Jayden Reed. I just don't want to overvalue Jayden
Reed. This feels like other than Nabers, who we'll get to shortly, this feels like the guy who could be almost anything. Like if Christian Watson can't stay healthy and Jayden Reed takes a step forward, he could be an absolute steal at this cost. And if Christian Watson plays 15 games, Jayden Reed might play half the snaps. Literally might just be somebody you can never trust unless he happens to hit a big play. So I do think this whole Packers receiving core, besides Dobbs, could profile as kind of part-time players. I think Dobbs will probably be the full-time guy. And we're just going to have I would much rather draft Jayden Reed in best ball than I would in regular redraft.
I'm a fan of his talent. I think that he's the most versatile receiver that Green Bay has. They can ask him to do about anything and he could come through on it. Here are some of my favorite stats on Reed. 17.4 PPR points per game in his last 8. That's from week 10 on. 7 touchdowns. 2 of them were rushing touchdowns. Both the rushing touchdowns came from 16 or more yards out. I think that's going to be a little bit tougher for him to replicate, but I think he will get some carries, end arounds, those types of things. In those last 8 games, Christian Watson played in 4 of them. In those 4, Reed averaged 14.8 PPR points per game. That's not bad. It's lower than the average, which means without Watson, that number was higher. It was 20 PPR points per game. I say that a lot. Sorry about that. In those 4 with Watson had 2 games with 20 plus and 2 games with 10.2 or fewer. Reed played at least 70% of the snaps in one of those 8 games. We've talked about how he played through an injury then. I wonder what's going to happen this year if he's fine. Is his snap share going to stay limited, or is he going to play a lot more? Is he going to be a regular part of that offense if he's 80 to 100% healthy from week to week? And that encourages me because I think he will be a regular part of that offense. I understand that there's risk involved. I think that's baked into the ADP right now. He's one of the wide receivers that I think you can draft as a wide receiver 3. And if things fall right, if he stays healthy, etc., he can finish the year as a low-end wide receiver 2.
Which Packers receiver are you guys taking first, Reed or Watson?
I'm taking Reed first.
I have them ranked almost 2 or 3 spots apart. Typically, what I'll do is I'll let somebody else take Reed, and I'll take Watson. But in our magazine draft, I took Reed as my 5th receiver, which was too easy to draft.
Wow. What round was that? Was that 6?
That was like round 8.
Yeah. Oh man, like that's awesome value. Good for
I'll
you.
tell you. Just make sure I'm correct.
Yeah, I've got him like 2 spots apart. I would say what's probably going to happen is if we get through the first couple of weeks of training camp and Christian Watson's very similarly sized hamstrings are healthy, then I will be drafting Christian Watson first. But for now, it's Reed a couple spots over Watson.
Yeah, so Jayden Reed played 72.3% of his snaps from the slot. So he had one of the fourth highest slot rate in the NFL. And the Packers were 20th in the NFL in snaps from 3 receiver sets. So this is kind of what we're talking about, is not playing more than 70% of the snaps most of the time. Heath saying he may not play 50% of the snaps sometimes. And they just don't line up in 3 receiver sets that much. At least they didn't last year. And he's the slot guy. Now, if he's as good as he was on a per route basis, he was really good. Maybe they find creative ways to get him on the field. But
the other problem is he's one of the most obvious, like Dave talked about the 2 rushing touchdowns from over 16 yards. He's one of the most obvious touchdown regression candidates, rushing and catching the ball. I think he had a 10% receiving touchdown rate also. He has to see his volume go way up to match or come anywhere close to the production he was last year.
Right. But if he stays healthy and he's playing 80% of the snaps, then I think that
you think he does that if
in total.
Without an injury to anybody else?
Yeah. Sure.
So he's going to play outside now?
I think he's going to be an every down player, even with Watson, Wicks, Dobbs.
You think he's going to be an every down player? Not every down, but you think he's going to be
but close. I think he'll be a regular part of that offense. Second-year receiver, very talented. They obviously treasure his speed if they're using him as a runner. He's going to be out there. It would be crazy to not, unless I guess the one thing that could hold him back is Dontavian Wicks just blows the doors off him.
Well, I think Christian Watson stays healthy.
And Christian Watson stays healthy.
Because Dobbs is going to be out there. I think he's the one full-time wide receiver for the Packers.
Yeah,
he was last year.
This may be actually one thing that's worth watching in the preseason is the snaps. I actually don't even remember if the Packers are one of those teams that plays their guys in the preseason.
I certainly wouldn't play Christian Watson or Jayden Reed in the preseason.
Well, but I would like to see their personnel groupings and if they're using him outside of the slot more. But all right, let's go to Marquise Brown going over to the Chiefs. Huge offensive upgrade in his first 5 seasons in the NFL. Marquise Brown's been on a bottom 5 pass offense in terms of gross passing yards per game 3 times. The Chiefs have been top 8 in gross passing yards all 5 of those seasons. Top 8 in touchdown passes, and 8, by the way, was last year. I mean, they're usually top 5 in passing yards and touchdowns. So great opportunity here for Marquise Brown. Wait, where's Malik Nabers?
You skipped him. I thought you were just saving him for the end because we were going to we were going to want to talk for 45 minutes about him, and you didn't want to do that.
Okay, yes, I will save the best for last. I will save Nabers for last. And Dave, then I'll let you do the pros and cons on Marquise Brown.
The pros are he's had pockets of unbelievable fantasy production each of the last 2 years. And then prior to that, he was certainly getting a lot of volume and being effective. Here's some examples. First 5 games of 2023. This is mostly with Josh Dobbs as his quarterback. 8.4 targets per game, 15.2 PPR average. 2022, first 6 games, no DeAndre Hopkins on the field, 18.3 PPR average. That's on 10.7 targets per game. That's kind of a Kyler Murray stat. 2021, just overall, 9.1 targets per game, 13 per 7 was his average in full point per reception leagues.
That was Baltimore, right?
That was Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the year without Lamar. Just, I'm going back to your Lamar Jackson stat because you said 12.9 with Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that was when Jackson was hurt.
The first 8 games of that season with Lamar Jackson, that was Marquise Brown. That looked like the true Marquise Brown breakout. He was on pace for 98 catches, 1,449 yards, 13 touchdowns on 147 targets. Then he started struggling. Jackson got hurt a few games later, and the season was derailed after that. But he has had these stretches of greatness. 8 games, 6 games, 5 games in each of the last 3 seasons. Yes.
I was just going to say the other stat that helps me with Marquise Brown and why I'm kind of encouraged by him. Past 5 seasons, receivers with at least 7 targets in Kansas City. There's been 71 times. 12 or more PPR points 45 times. And a lot of this is Tyreek Hill, but it still stands. 15 plus PPR points 35 out of 71 occasions. Those are games, obviously. 20 plus PPR 25 out of 71 games. So once you get to that 7 target range, you're in play to be a very capable fantasy receiver. And I think Brown's going to be that guy, especially if Rashee Rice isn't ready to start the field or start the season, especially if Xavier Worthy isn't going to be on the field that much because he's just not ready. I think he's a 1-year Band-Aid for Kansas City's passing game, but I think he'll be a good one. And he's in a great spot to really just flourish.
I mean, you've got 35-year-old Travis Kelce, who's spent the summer touring with Taylor Swift. You've got Rashee Rice having all kinds of concerns off the field. You've got Marquise Brown going to just hanging out with Patrick Mahomes apparently all summer long. Xavier Worthy's got the hamstring issues, can't practice. It's gone pretty great for him in terms of just like
once there's a Rice suspension announced, this ADP might get doubled, cut in half, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are also just scared to get Brown on their team because he's let people down for stretches.
I don't think anybody's scared to draft him this spot. I think people are clamoring for him in this spot. I think that the scared will come. Fair. The scared will come if there's
2 rounds higher.
Yeah, and it's a 4-game suspension for Rice or less than that, and then it's okay. Yeah, he'll get off to a good start, or Travis Kelce's going to have a snap share, but he's still Travis Kelce, or Xavier Worthy with a hamstring injury in training camp, but he's still the guy that the Chiefs drafted in the first round. There'll be a lot of buts, a lot of ifs, a lot of what could happen, but I mean, it feels like the upside is through the roof. Like, we've highlighted some of his best performances. Like, what if that's a full season and he's now with the best quarterback from a passing perspective he's ever played with?
Yep.
It's hard to overlook that.
That stat that I gave earlier on the Ravens, I don't know why Brown didn't show up there, but he's actually the one that has the best PPR per game average.
Well, that was the year where again, Jackson
Right.
and Huntley. That's why I looked at it when you brought it up because I knew he was a little bit better than that. But that was the year where Jackson started dealing with injuries.
Right. It was 14.1. 14.1 blew away Zay Flowers, but still no one's averaged 15 PPR points per game with Lamar.
Yeah, well, I think that was also a year where the Ravens, I think, were 9th in pass attempts, which is weird because the other 4 seasons of Lamar Jackson's starting career as a starter, they've been bottom 5 in pass attempts. Just a little Zay Flowers note there. Like, if they're going to be 9th in pass attempts, then I would take Zay Flowers in the as a top 24 wide receiver. I just don't think it's going to happen. So it's like, you guys really just sold me on Marquise Brown. I don't even know.
He's the anti-Terry McLaurin.
You didn't even say. I don't even think you guys picked him as having the most upside. I feel like you guys said Nabers had the most upside in the group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, if Rice isn't suspended or it's a 2-game suspension, then it's hard to say Marquise Brown has that opportunity to be that guy. He still could.
Yeah, he could. I mean,
did we not make the downside case for Marquise Brown?
Let's not make it all sunshine and roses for a guy
the downside is Travis Kelce goes back to being a double-digit touchdown guy, and the receiving corps still is not as involved from a touchdown perspective. They're talking all about being a more vertical offense. Makes sense when you add Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, but what if they're not? What if teams are still taking that away from Mahomes in this offense? And you're still forced to dink and dunk your way down the field, and that's not exactly Marquise Brown's game. Plus Rice not being suspended and Xavier Worthy being everything he's as advertised as not just a speed guy, but a legit wide receiver, then Marquise Brown looks like a guy that's getting close to 30, has bounced around to now 3 teams, and may not be this, go-to guy for Patrick Mahomes and is just MVS 2.0.
Do you want to hear how bad the numbers are for him outside of those little stretches that I talked about earlier for Marquise
I wouldn't
Brown?
Use last year, though, because he was playing hurt at the end of
I'll use the year before if you want. You can pick your year. And you could do this with a bunch of players, but this is just the streaky nature of what Marquise Brown has been. And I think that's what you've got to expect from him. From week 7 through the end of the 2022 season, he averaged in PPR 7.8 points, 7.2 targets per game.
But again, that was Kyler Murray tearing his ACL too.
Yeah, that happened there. And then week 6 through the end of last year, 6.6 targets per game, 6.5 PPR points per game.
Horrible. We thought,
I don't think he can do that in Kansas City, but that is some of the ugliness.
But that was 2021 again when Lamar Jackson got hurt, so there's asterisks to all of this.
Right. So maybe no. I'm thinking at 11. If he averages 11 for 4 or 5 weeks, people are going to get tired of Marquise Brown. But I think the ADP is so good, and there are enough people in every league that look at his name and they go, yeah, he's been around a long time. He's never been great. They're going to bypass him for some other receivers that they really shouldn't.
If he's averaging 11 PPR points per game, he's a great number 3 receiver.
I'm looking for more than that, especially.
Well, obviously everybody's looking for more than that, but
right.
Mean,
but this year, I think
where he's well above that.
The 18 to 30 range is ripe with guys that can get you 13 to 15.
But he's not being drafted.
That's lower than I think. That's lower than you think. Last year, 44 receivers averaged more than 11 points per game.
Yeah, look, it's not ideal, but there's going to obviously be games in there where he's going to have some big games. If he's getting to 11, there's going to be some games where he's disappointing.
Yeah,
you're attaching yourself to Mahomes.
Right. It hasn't really worked in terms of drafting Chiefs wide receivers other than Tyreek Hill, obviously. Let's say
it's failed with MVS. It's failed with Sky Moore. It's failed with Kadarius Toney. I mean,
I think it worked with Juju, didn't it?
It worked with Juju when he was healthy.
It worked, but it wasn't like he didn't win you your league. He was, like a good number 2 receiver. Yeah. It's not a bad, right. No, it makes sense picking him 35th, which is right around his ADP where he is in the consensus rankings, Marquise Brown. Last question here. Rashee Rice if there were no suspension for Rashee Rice, where are you thinking you'd be ranking the 3 Chiefs wide receivers?
Rice would be here.
Rice would probably even be higher than this. But I don't think that Brown necessarily has to have Rice miss a bunch of time. It's possible that Brown could just be better than Rice when they're both on the field. But I think Rice would be probably top 25. Brown would be around 40. And I probably would have soured even more on Worthy.
Okay. Yeah, I think Brown could still be the best receiver, and he might still be the one that I take, certainly in non-PPR first.
All right, well, that's it for our show. There's no one else interesting to talk about.
Great show, guys. Well
Good
done.
job.
Oh, just kidding, Malik Nabers. Dave, come back, Malik. All right, Heath. The moment.
All right, Adam, make the pro con for Malik Nabers.
Yeah.
No, I can't take that away from Heath.
No, you can make the pro.
I don't think I need to stretch. I don't think anyone needs to make the con. I think that's the easy one. Yeah, the pro is I loved him before, as Dave thankfully mentioned on F15.5 before the NFL draft. I loved Malik Nabers, and a lot of people had him as their wide receiver 1. Enough people. And remember, some people had Jahmyr Gibbs as their RB1 last year ahead of Bijan Robinson, and Gibbs had a better rookie season than Robinson. So Nabers could be talented enough, to be a better player than Marvin Harrison. Obviously, I'm not taking him ahead of Marvin Harrison. So I've seen rookie wide receivers come into bad situations and have great rookie years.
It is possible.
They make their quarterbacks better. They bring their quarterbacks to levels that we hadn't seen before, which hopefully could just be somewhere close to league average for Daniel Jones. Nabers is the kind of guy who can do a lot after the catch. And it's just a bet on talent. It's a bet on upside. And I actually think that there's going to be a pretty good floor there because I think he will get a lot of targets. And by the way, historically, or looking at the last 6 years of players who have been drafted in rounds 7 through 9 and have been good, top 24, in top 12 in a lot of cases, like there are going to be 3 or so every year. They get 7 or more targets almost every time. So you have to ask yourself, can he get that? I think he can. That's my case for Malik Nabers. He's actually, in some ways, a very easy player to evaluate, but the outcomes are obviously very difficult to predict. But we know he's really good, and he's got a terrible quarterback.
Yeah, I think, and you talk about those rookie wide receivers. I went through this morning and just looked at all the last 10 years of rookie wide receivers drafted in the first half of round 1. And it really could not be more of a coin flip. There are some Hall of Fame league winners, and there's Corey Davis and Henry Ruggs and John Ross and Corey Coleman. And like it's 9 out of 19 have been really good. But I think you look at the most recent, like we all think Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, very good. They're also still on our breakout list in year 3 because they played with bad quarterbacks, even though a couple of them may have played with better quarterbacks than Daniel Jones. I think it's hard to underestimate how bad this situation has been for pass catchers. No wide receiver in the past, 6 years with more than 751 receiving yards, more than 60 yards per game even. And they haven't had good pass catchers, but Kenny Galladay's 17-game average before he went to the Giants was 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns per year. He played 26 games there and had 600 yards and 1 touchdown.
He was like a broken down. That was
I think he may have just like been broken in his soul. Bro. And then Darren Waller went there and again had health problems, but was better with Tyrod Taylor than he was with Daniel Jones, indisputably.
We're really using Kenny Golladay and Darren Waller as the examples of why Malik Nabers can't be good.
No, I'm not saying he can't be good. I'm saying this has been a pass. Like it's funny because it's so bad. It's been just the worst environment for a pass catcher in the NFL for half a decade, and they've got the same guy playing quarterback.
Yeah, I think
don't disrespect your lock like that. Come on.
No, I think bringing up Golladay and Waller is actually a good point because I was excited about both of those guys. A lot of people were, and they were huge busts. So it's perfectly valid. I think one of the reasons I'm excited about him, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is I think he is, I don't know if I want to use the word significantly, but a clearly better prospect than Drake London, than even guys like Drake London and Garrett Wilson, who were really good prospects. But even listening to your Dynasty show, Heath, during the draft lead up, I feel like the guests you had were saying that the top 3 wide receivers in this draft class, Harrison, Nabers, Odunze, would have been better than anyone in the last, I think, 3 classes.
I think Nabers is more highly regarded than London and Wilson. I would say that. I would hesitate and probably strike through the clearly part because those guys were elite prospects, and we absolutely. I mean, I think it shows you what a great prospect Drake London was, that he's had the past 2 seasons that he has, and that we're drafting him as a round 2 or round 3 pick now. Like that's how much we believe in the talent of Drake London. But other than that, we're supposed to be the 3 best wide receiver prospects of at least the last 3 years.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Jamie, thoughts on Nabers?
I mean, just the potential for upside here. Yes, the receivers for the Giants have been awful, whether it's been Kenny Golladay, who they overpaid, or a broken down and maybe 1 foot out the door, Darren Waller. Notwithstanding, the formula, which is something that Brian Daboll was a part of, is how do you make your quarterback better? Well, you're bringing talent, and so they've tried, and I don't think they've necessarily brought in the right talent. Yes, there was some reason to be excited about Golladay, and there was reason to be excited about Waller, especially that first drive, man, against the Panthers. It was just so fun.
That preseason? Yeah.
But in any event, this is what helped Josh Allen from Brian Daboll's perspective. I don't think it's going to help Daniel Jones, because I don't know if Daniel Jones is ever going to develop into the type of quarterback Giants fans thought he was once upon a time, or maybe some NFL talent evaluators. But in terms of Nabers and what he can be, he's going to still be a prolific wide receiver. He's going to be weighed down by his quarterback. That's just the nature of it. So to Heath's point, yes, you don't want to overvalue him because of his talent, and hopefully he will overcome that. I think that's why he's being drafted too soon, and why we're not necessarily in agreement with that based on the ADP. But if you get him at the right price and you're drafting him as your number 3 receiver with the chance to see that maybe second half production, whether it's, I keep making a joke, but maybe it is Drew Lock, maybe that's the type of quarterback. Like to his point, Tyrod Taylor was better for Darren Waller. It's just, it could be the backup is better than the starter. And that's what helps these guys take that step forward. He's going to be fed targets. He's going to hopefully be able to do a lot with those targets. Dave talks a lot about, the bad targets that we see from some of these quarterbacks, and it makes total sense. He's going to be in that canoe of, just getting bad target shares from his quarterback.
Uncatchable targets.
I'll believe in Daboll scheming him up to get those opportunities. We've talked a lot about, he's going to, I think, have to change his game a little bit and make some plays at the line of scrimmage that he's probably not used to doing. By comparison to what his talent level suggests. But you put the ball in his hands, I think he's going to make plays. And so I'm banking on his talent overcoming a situation. And then hopefully the Giants addressing the quarterback situation maybe next year. And then that helps him become the superstar he's capable of being. But for this year, I think he's a good number 3 wide receiver. And you're banking on upside. And I think he has the upside to be one of the better players at his position, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Do you think, Adam, because like the 7 targets per game is not good. If it's 7 targets per game, I think he's going to have with 7 targets a game from Daniel Jones, he's going to have a hard time being a top 30 wide receiver. That's 119 Daniel Jones targets.
Well, at least
or Drew Lock. But do you think, like what we saw Dable do when Jones has been healthy for the most part the last couple of years, is they've limited the passing game quite a bit. The way that Garrett Wilson's been good and Drake London really hasn't for fantasy yet is because Wilson's got to play in some pretty high pass attempt environment, whereas London really didn't. It's 500, 520 attempts, something like that. Is there a chance that because of Malik Nabers, Dable's now drawing up a more pass-heavy scheme?
Yeah, I think so. And
they'll have to bank on that.
Barkley, right? Like you're not going to give the ball to Devin Singletary 18 times.
Right. It feels like this. We're going to see a totally different offense from the Giants.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
I think you're right, Heath. I mean, they have to for Nabers to hit. If you guys want the stats.
So we're going to get like 600 Daniel Jones pass attempts.
There's no way
he lasts that long.
There's no way Drew Lock is not starting some games because like if he struggles, Schneier keeps talking about this and I haven't seen this. I got to confirm this. Maybe you guys can. Schneier says that he's got that same clause that Derek Carr and Russell Wilson had, where if they got hurt, their contract was guaranteed for the following season.
I think that's right. Yeah.
If he struggles and they want to move on, he's getting benched fairly quickly. So I do think that we should be expecting some Drew Lock or a good version of Daniel Jones. I don't see how Jones is bad and keeps his job all year. Plus he gets hurt every year.
But we might not get a good version of Drew Lock either.
Have we ever?
No, right.
I mean, that's obviously the first huge drawback is the quarterbacks. I don't think we need to say much more than that. And then the other thing that just kind of makes me feel a little gross is we're counting on Dable to come through and put together an offense that's gonna highlight Nabers and make this other group of wideouts that he's put together suddenly come alive and suddenly be productive. And I know that Dable's a really smart guy and we've given him a lot of credit, but does he still deserve that credit after the last couple of years? And are we really ready to trust it without that running game being what it used to be? I think that's hand in hand. The run game not having Saquon Barkley, okay, that should mean more passing. That should mean more focus on getting the ball in Malik Nabers' hands. I think there's a chance he could average 8 targets per game, but it's 8 targets from Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. And yeah, this thing could get messy, and it's going to be really tough to look at Malik Nabers and say, all right, this guy's a stud if the quarterbacks are going to be huge problems. That's why he's a number 3 receiver. I think we've got him ranked absolutely appropriately. I don't think you should go out of your way to reach for Malik Nabers in any type of redraft league.
And you're not getting him.
I think it's worth it.
This is the problem with Nabers and Flowers. You can sit here and say, yeah, if you get him at the right price as a just outside the top 30 or around 30th or later for Heath, it's in the 40s for Nabers. But they are going 23rd and 24th overall. If you look at different websites, you're not getting Flowers and Nabers in the top 30. So it's up to you. I mean, if you want to have a little fun with it and gamble on these young, talented receivers, if you were, would you gamble on Nabers or gamble on Flowers?
Nabers.
Flowers for me.
Flowers. No, okay. I'm sorry, Nabers. I have them back-to-back. Nabers, one spot ahead of Flowers. I think the gamble word is appropriate because you know what you're getting from the Ravens offense for the most part. You saw it last year, so in the case of Nabers, there's an unknown. There's an unknown of, will they make a quarterback change? There's an unknown of what the offense will look like. I just keep going back to Barkley's gone. Offensive line play should be better, so keeping the quarterback upright.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
And the strength of this team right now feels like, now this is, look, hopefully Devin Singletary has a productive season, but I think you kind of know what he is. The strength of this team might be in his receiving core because I think Wan'Dale Robinson will have a decent season too. I kind of like him as well. It's just a matter of, where Daniel Jones or Drew Lock can get these guys to perform at. And that's the scary part of it.
Yeah. All right. So the stat that I don't think I gave this earlier, but looking at rounds 7 through 9 in ADP, wide receivers over the last 6 seasons, 23 have finished top 24 per game. So that's 4 per year, basically. Have finished top 24 per game. And there's usually about 14 or so, 13 maybe drafted in this range per year. So let's say 1/3 to 1/4 of them are finishing top 24 per game. Now, 19 of the 23 wide receivers who have been drafted in rounds 7 through 9 and finished top 24 per game have averaged at least 7 targets per game. 17 of the 23 have averaged at least 7.5 targets per game, which is about 128 targets per 17 games. So you should be, and I'll lead off our tomorrow show with this stat for those who don't stick around long enough to hear it. You should be hoping for target volume in this range. It's very, very important. It's always important. But 7 or more targets is kind of a big number for wide receivers who have success in this range. Last year, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, and Michael Pittman were drafted in this range. The year before that, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amari Cooper, Devontae Smith, Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk, all top 15 wide receivers. They were drafted in this range. So we have more players to talk about. We'll do it tomorrow on Fantasy Football Today.